Hey, I'm Matt Geiger. My goal here is to give you the full story on common abortion talking points in the US with full context behind them. So, spoiler alert, both sides like to make a lot of things up. So, let's get right to it. A common pro choice talking point is that abortion restrictions are causing thousands of deaths from back alley, unsafe abortions. And this is false. Just before the Roe v. Wade decision, so when abortion restrictions still existed, there were between 90 and 150 deaths per year in the US because of abortions. And even though these numbers were probably underreported, most sources think that the number back then would have been in the hundreds, not in the thousands. Nowadays, abortion-related deaths are in the single digits in the US. The big determinant of how many women die isn't abortion laws, though, it's medical enhancements. So with or without Roe v. Wade, it's unlikely that you'd see even hundreds of deaths from abortion, let alone tens of thousands. Pro-life advocates say that abortion leads to depression and other mental health issues. Studies don't support this, and actually a study in the Journal of American Medical Association indicates that the opposite is probably true. Women who were denied an abortion were more likely to experience anxiety symptoms, lower self-esteem, and lower life satisfaction than women who received abortions. Rates of depression were the same between both groups, though. Pro-life proponents say that human life begins at conception, and therefore any abortion beyond that is killing a human life. So the vast majority of biologists and physicians believe that human life does begin at fertilization, when the sperm and egg fuse to create a single-cell, unique human called a zygote. There's a minority who believe the embryo doesn't become a person until implantation a few days after fertilization, but the majority of biologists and physicians agree that human life, a brand new organism, a unique human being, begins within 14 days of conception. Even though the debate focuses pretty heavily on the question of when life begins, there's really not much to that debate. The real question is if a human embryo or fetus should get all the same rights as a person who's been born. To rally their troops to fight harder, both sides say that Roe v. Wade is close to being overturned. Roe v. Wade established a constitutional right to privacy, including a woman's right to choose abortion. While it's possible that it could be overturned straight up, most scholars think that that's really unlikely. Roe v. Wade's been reaffirmed many times by many different courts, even conservative majority courts. The Supreme Court's typically had deference to stare decisis, or following established precedent, unless the facts substantially change. What's more likely is that the Supreme Court could chip away at abortion rights by expanding the sorts of laws that states can pass. As the law is today, states can pass abortion regulations as long as they don't impose an undue burden on the woman seeking an abortion up until about 24 weeks. That undue burden is determined by weighing the benefits of a law against the restriction of liberty. Pro-life states have been passing a bunch of laws recently that they know will be legally challenged, with the hope that this conservative Supreme Court we have now is going to define that line differently than courts in the past. The pro-choice camp says that late-term abortions are usually only happening when it's necessary to protect the woman's health. And so to give you some stats, 92% of abortions are done within the first 13 weeks. But we're talking about this 1% of abortions that are done after 20 weeks, which is either later in the second trimester or in the third trimester. These cases are made up of situations where there's a malformation of the fetus or the fetus isn't expected to survive. These can sometimes be discovered around that 20-week mark. Also, there could be situations where the woman's life is at risk. But according to surveys, the 1% is also made up of people who didn't realize they were pregnant until later in the pregnancy or had some sort of access issues, either getting to an abortion clinic or problems raising the money needed to get an abortion. The reality is we don't know exactly how much of this 1% is made up of medical necessity versus the other elective type issues I discussed, but we do have enough data to sort of make general estimates. What it looks like is that ballpark, it's probably just about 10% of late-term abortions that are to protect the health of the mother, about 40% because of severe fetal health issues that were discovered later in a pregnancy, and then the remaining 50% are those other explanations that are considered elective. Pro-lifers say that a fetus can feel pain, and some states even require that doctors tell women who want an abortion that the fetus may feel pain. This is not true. To feel pain, a fetus needs to have a few different components all working together. First, the receptors in the skin to sense an injury need to develop. That happens between 7.5 and 15 weeks. Second, the neurons in the spinal cord need to send that message to the brain. That develops around 19 weeks. Third, the neurons linking the spinal cord to the pain receptors in the brain need to develop. That happens between 23 and 24 weeks. And then the fourth piece is that there needs to be brain activity to register the experience of pain, and that develops around the 30-week mark. Some people cite fetus reflexes and fetal stress responses to argue that a fetus feels pain in the second trimester, but these aren't regulated by the part of the brain associated with consciousness like pain is. Pro-life advocates claim that Democrats approve of abortions up until birth. So in terms of abortions up until birth, there are 7 states, Alaska, Colorado, New Hampshire, Vermont, New Mexico, New Jersey, and Oregon, that have no limits on when you can get an abortion. In reality, in those states, most abortion providers won't do an abortion past a certain point in the pregnancy, except when there's some sort of extreme circumstances, but that's not because of any legal barriers in those states. In looking into all these issues, you sort of realize how shameless both sides are about just straight up lies. Bending the truth is nothing new for politicians, but this issue, more than any other that I've looked into, just seems like it has 2 completely different set of facts depending on which side of the debate you sit on. Hopefully I helped cut through that a little bit. Thanks for watching.